The story of modern politics in Australia is strewn with climate policies. Some never made it off the drawing board. Some were more effective than others. In total, the smouldering debris of years of climate wars. This government's proposal is to rework the safeguard mechanism, a key element in its plan to bend the carbon emissions curve in the direction of the 2030 target.
You don't reduce emissions, you don't reach our target unless you're dealing with the biggest emitters.
The coming weeks will tell us if his plan for the biggest emitters will pass Parliament, or if this policy, like the others, will be sent to the scrap heap. It's got temperatures in Parliament rising.
The safeguard mechanism is another carbon tax with a facelift.
Any effective climate policy should bring down pollution from coal and gas. Labor's policy doesn't do that. In fact, it gets worse.
Here's what Australia's near-term emissions target looks like. Carbon emissions were up here in 2005. And this is the target. No more than 354 megatons of carbon dioxide pumped into the atmosphere in 2030. A 43% reduction and less than 8 years to get there. That will require deeper cuts than we've made over the past decade. Enter the safeguard mechanism. It applies to about 215 facilities around the country. Many of those are fossil fuel producers, coal mines and gas extraction and processing. Some manufacturers, producers of materials like steel and concrete, and airlines are also affected. Collectively, they produce about 28% of the nation's emissions. The mechanism sets limits on emissions for each of those facilities. The scheme itself isn't new. It was introduced during the Turnbull government in 2016. But it set the limits sky high, and the former government didn't fully enforce it. Since 2005, some sectors have cut emissions, the electricity sector doing the heaviest lifting, while these four sectors contain most of the safeguard facilities, and in those, emissions are still climbing. The rules in place just aren't bending the curve. Labor is proposing to keep the terrible name, but toughen the rules. It wants to give each facility a cap based on its current emissions, and then reduce that cap by 4.9% a year. If a facility goes below its cap, it can sell the spare emissions to other facilities. So over the decade, the collective emissions across the facilities are squeezed down. The coalition is against it. Hardly surprising given it opposed the 43% climate target in the first place.
This is a tax that's being imposed. It's 3 times the tax that Julia Gillard proposed.
The opposition argues the cost of carbon credits is too high, and the reductions pace imposed by the mechanism is more demanding than in similar economies. It says that'll put big polluters in a chokehold, sending business offshore and affecting jobs.
Of the 215 businesses that will be hit, 63 are located in Queensland. All but 2 of these businesses are situated in the regions.
While Labor's other flank is worried about what it sees as a massive loophole that could perversely allow emissions to go up. Here's why. The safeguard mechanism allows companies to offset excess emissions by buying carbon credits. Think planting trees and land restoration. And crucially, there's no limit to the number of carbon credits a company can buy.
Coal and gas pollution gets to keep going up as long as they buy tree planting permits on the other side of the country.
The Greens also want new coal and gas projects in Australia explicitly ruled out, arguing that capping emissions on these 215 polluters means little if new fossil fuel facilities can start operating. On that, climate scientists tend to agree. The IPCC says emissions from existing and planned fossil fuel projects would already lead to more than 1.5 degrees of warming.
Investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness.
One thing is for sure, failure to deliver a scheme that works would leave the government's climate ambitions up in smoke.